Welcome to Forever Wild, a podcast about family, memory, and the stories that shape who we become. I'm Meagan McGovern, the oldest of four sisters.
And I'm Nora Gibbs, the most ridiculous of four sisters. Together, we're sharing our journey growing up with an actor father, a mother who didn't think the rules applied to her, at least financially, and a childhood full of chaos, adventure, and unforgettable moments.
Every episode, we talk about stories from our childhood, and we talk about how siblings who come from the same families can see their past in very different ways and how we carry that forward in our lives today.
Thank you for joining us. This is Forever Wild.
I think you'd have some argument about whether or not you're the most ridiculous of the four of us. So, last time we ended our lovely story, I was in jail, and you were going to Australia. So,
Against my will.
against your will. So, okay, you want to start with your story, my story, whichever one you want.
Well, I'm curious to see how your story goes. So I didn't know that this was why you didn't go to Australia, as I mentioned last week. So I knew. So where we ended it, I think last week was you had come back from California
Yes.
and you were driving up into Indian Lake area or Adirondacks, and you got pulled over and got arrested.
So, I think I spent October, November, December. I think it was 2 or 3 months in Los Angeles. I stayed with a friend of mine from high school, Chris. We were not dating, and it was and I was actually dating back and forth his friend Josh. It was super uncomfortable because I didn't really have a good place to stay, and he didn't really kind of want this girl from high school there, and but I was trying to find myself. I was trying to find out what I wanted to do in life. I was 18. I had no money, like not a dollar to my name. I was going to get a job out there and get an apartment, and that I didn't want to do that. And I really wanted to go to college. I wasn't sure how to do that. I knew I didn't want a life in LA, and I didn't really like it there. So I was kind of lost. And then when I heard about the sale of the century thing and the chance to go to Australia, I was all over it. And that was like, Australia wasn't my dream, but travel was my dream. My big thing was I wanted to go anywhere, and I had never had the chance. And so I worked on getting my passport and went home. And when I got back there, it was a hot mess. And I don't know if you remember what a hot mess you guys were in. But when I got back, you guys were living in a motel. Do you remember that?
In Indian, where?
I don't know. I remember that Katie was there and her boyfriend John was there.
Oh, I do remember this.
Yes.
Yeah, we were living in a hotel in Glens
We were
Falls.
living in a motel. So I thought I was coming back to, happy family reunion. I've been gone 3 months. It's a couple days before Christmas. Everything's going to be great. You guys are living in a motel, living out of the ubiquitous black garbage bags that are like the bane of my existence, where all clothes are stuffed into garbage bags. We've got nothing left, no furniture. We don't own a damn thing. Everything's been torn apart. And Mom is still waiting for the money from the business deal in New York. But the whole dream of me having a land and a cabin and everything else is gone. This has all been
Right.
reduced to the guy still owes her like $20,000, and that's all there is left. And he's already, basically screwed her out of the land. And I don't know if he screwed her out of it or not. She was awful.
I'm going to assume no. I'm going to assume this is her fault.
I think he gave her $20, $30, $40, $50,000. I did look up something the other night. It is called right of first refusal. She had right of first refusal on the land. Which,
yeah, I was right.
Yeah, and it was just a word that's been floating around in our head for 30 years. It's a term that means that somehow or another, she knew the guy who owned the land, and he gave her right of first refusal. She had the rights to do it. Whatever it was, she got a lot of cash out of it. Over 6 or 8 months, it kept us alive. She didn't get the land out of it. So I'm mad, and I'm hurt, and I'm upset. And I find out you guys are living in a hotel.
And we're living in this hotel while we're waiting to go to Australia. We left the house in North River, and we were living there while we were figuring out how to get to Australia, or while we were waiting for our flight to Australia. It wasn't, we were living in the hotel with no end game. The end game was, we're in this hotel, we're leaving for Australia in a week.
So on the way back up to this motel from the airport, we got pulled over, Katie and I did, and I am sure they had our car flagged, or they were looking for it.
Right.
So we got pulled over, and I had checks out from my account, and the guy said, "I'm going to arrest you." And I was absolutely sure that this was wrong, that they were looking for mom. Absolutely sure there was no way they could do it because they didn't arrest nice white 18-year-old girls that were cute and in college for nothing, and that I could
Right.
talk my way out of it. Mom talked her way out of it. Why couldn't I cry and talk my way out of it? And I tried, and it did not work. And I was put in a cell, and I had a notebook with me. And to be fair, with all the privilege and everything else I had, I used it, they used it, whatever. And I was allowed to not be searched. And I had all of my clothes on, and I didn't have to take my clothes off. And I was allowed to keep a notebook and a pen. And I called mom wherever and told her to come bail me out. And I was in the cell a long time. I mean, it was 12, 14, 16 hours, something, especially after a flight from California. And
Yeah. A long time.
Katie had still had all my stuff in the car. She had all my stuff because, she drove home and told mom what happened. But that was like my point where I said, this is it. I'm done. I'm never going back. There's no way I could ever have anything to do with her again. I
Right.
want more from my life than going to jail for her. And I feel bad for Meagan and Nora. Too bad. I can't do it. This is too much for me to rescue by myself. I'll rescue what I can, but I can't do this.
And at this point, Katie had a boyfriend, and Katie had a boyfriend named John, and Katie was very into John, and they were together, right? Like I feel like at this point it was going to be me and Morgan and mom, Katie and John, and then you were on your own.
And it was essentially, I mean, Katie and John were essentially married for all, I mean, that's how close they were. And,
They were always together.
right. And there was no one without the other. And for whatever reason, yeah, I had never had a relationship really like that. I never really had a boyfriend at that point. And I always had things I wanted to do and places I wanted to go. And I mean, for lack of better term, I don't know, maybe this sounds awful or arrogant, but I wanted to go do great things. I had been told my whole life I could go do great things, and I couldn't see myself living whatever life this was.
Yeah.
And so one of the things with the being out on jail is when I went to the judge, and the judge said, "You have to stay in the state and you can't leave." And I said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I have a ticket to go to Australia in 3 days," or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And he said, "You can't." And I said, I have to. I'm going to Australia. And he said, "Then I'm going to have to put you back in jail. You can't have bail."
I don't think I ever knew this, or maybe I knew it at the time, and it's one of the many things I
Yeah.
blocked out.
Well, and
I'm
because of
sorry.
that, mom was,
That's so,
what?
it makes me really sad. Like I'm really sorry that that happened.
I am
And
too.
it's not my place to apologize, right, for mom's thing, but like it's honestly one of those things like shit, that's a big life changing, that's a, left path, right path, which one you're going to go kind of thing. And
Well, it
that's
is
a big
because
thing. And I'm really
yeah.
sorry that happened.
Well, you think of all the what ifs. Like, what if I had met a guy in Australia? What if I had loved it there and decided to go to college down there?
I
What if I
know.
had just, because I probably would have stayed. I was looking for a way out. I mean, that was maybe my
Yeah.
plan. But,
You could have had a platypus all to
oh
yourself.
man, koala, a wallaby. Um, but after all of that, I think mom was secretly thrilled that Katie and I were going to stay behind because Katie had a dog and she hadn't figured out what to do with her dog. She didn't leave Sugar.
Sugar.
I mean,
Oh, you love sugar.
one of the things that we haven't talked about in all of this is that throughout all of this, we had two dogs. We had Toby and Sugar. So when we're talking
Toby was half Rottweiler, half
Doberman,
Doberman Pinscher.
yes,
And they found him. Mom found him. I remember when we found him, it was in a furniture store parking lot. The
in,
guy who
in,
we were buying furniture
in
somewhere
California.
in
So,
California. So this dog had been all over with us.
and then Sugar was a little white poodleish thing that Katie just
It was,
adored. Sugar had been with us forever. Sugar had been with us since before the first sale of the century. So Sugar had been
and
with us
Sugar
forever.
was deaf. Sugar was born deaf,
Yes.
dumb.
And she was awful. Oh my God, she
Oh,
was awful. But
and she was a white poodle, so she always had that brown shit in the corner of her eyes.
Katie loved
Oh,
that dog.
I should love that dog.
Katie loved that dog the way Sandra loves Rosie. There was
Yeah.
no separating them. So
Booger.
all of this. So when we're talking about like leaving LA and Ben Stein and all of this, we're also talking about packing up a Doberman and a poodle in the car. And we talk about showing up at my Aunt Sonia's house for Christmas the year before this. That's what we would, this is, with a Doberman and a poodle, and the houses in Connecticut and all the places that my mother rents, and the house in Indian Lake on the lake, 2 dogs. I don't remember the
Yeah,
dogs there, but they must have been there with us.
they were there.
So we're letting them in and out all the time, all of that. So there's no place for us to go with 2 dogs, and Katie can't figure out how to go to Australia with the 2 dogs. And so I think Mom was thrilled that there was going to be somebody to leave behind, and also she had unfinished business with the guy in the land deal. And so she went and rented a house in a place called Bolton Landing. And she rented a summer house again, but it was
Oh, no
winter.
way.
It was winter, so she got a good deal on it. And she got us into this house for Christmas, and we managed to have a Christmas tree. And this was, I think you guys were leaving in between. You left in between Christmas and January 1st. So
It's important to note that she rented this house from the manager of the Adirondack Red Wings, which was the pro hockey team up there.
that is important to note. That does come in later.
It does come into play.
So
You're welcome.
we rented this house, which was a really kind of a cool house with
It was a great house.
2 dogs. And she essentially was there for 2 or 3 days. Somehow we got a Christmas tree and decorated it, I think, because you couldn't have Christmas without a tree. And 2 days after Christmas, she gave Katie and me, which also meant giving Katie, John, and me, I think it was $15,000, or said, here's where you get the $15,000. You're going to get it in 3 days from this guy in New York. And I want you guys to go up to the Adirondacks and pay off all of my bad checks everywhere so that I don't get arrested when I get back. And pay the rent on this house for the next couple of months. And send the rest to me in Australia if we can figure out how to wire it. And live on the rest of it. So she's leaving a 17-year-old, an 18-year-old, or six. I think Katie was 17 and I was 19 at this point. And she left us with $12,000 cash in the middle of nowhere. But we also didn't have, but when we had a terrible car, like a $1,500 garbage car. So you guys left.
Well, the police were looking. Let me
Yeah.
backtrack a little bit. The police were looking for Mom at this point. And the reason I know that is because she knew they were looking for her, because in this house, there was a really big master closet. And in the back of the master closet, there was like attic space access, or some kind of access to a hidden like
There was a crawl
space,
space back there. Yeah.
a crawl space. And Mom had us, I don't remember who was there. It was me, I think Morgan, maybe, I don't remember who was there. She had us practice hiding her in that space in case the cops came to get her.
So that's one of the reasons that she wanted us to stay behind, because when we got this money from the guy, and that's one of the reasons the guy was so done with her, because she had racked up bad checks and all sorts of stuff all over the Adirondacks, and she was giving him a bad name. So he wanted to buy her out and be done. So he had nothing to do with her. So he was going to give her the last $15,000, $20,000, whatever it was, and be done. And she told us to go and clear all the bad checks, which could have been, and it's such a pain in the ass to do this. If you've never had to clear bad checks for somebody, you have to go to every store. Well, at least you did then. You have to go to every store where the bad check was written, go to the manager and say, I'm here to pay off a bad check, and apologize, and tell them your life story, and tell them how sorry you are, and give them an ID, and tell them you're not the person who's doing it, but you're paying it off for this person. And they might have 3 bad checks, or they might have 12, depending on how many was written. And so one check could be for 45, one could be for 165, one could be for 30. And then on top of that, so you have to pay off the amount for each of those. Then you have to pay off the $35 bounced check fee for each of those. And then you have to go to the next store, and the next store, and the next store. And to get that, you have to go to get a list from somebody. I don't know where you get a list of warrants or where they're from.
I feel like there used to be a place called Telecheck, but I don't know if that was after this.
Yeah, there's a place that you go, and it tells you. And some of the things will have gone to warrant, and some of the things won't have gone to warrant. And some of the places will let you pay them off and take it away, and some of them will say, no, I want to prosecute, and then you have to go to the county or the
And some of them will let you pay one bounce check fee. Some will make you pay 12 bounce check
Right.
fees if you have 12
So
weeks. Yep.
it could be doing something like this could take days and days, and you would not, still not know if it was clear. And then you'd have to go back to the county, to the sheriff, and say, does this person have any warrants? And like, well, I don't want to tell you. And they'd argue with you. And it was a whole thing. So that was like Katie and my task while she was gone, was to go clear her name, at least in New York. So I'm going to let you tell your story in a moment, but you left, and Katie and John and I, and oh my God, it was Eben. Eben came up from Connecticut.
Can I,
And he was my friend from Connecticut who I just adored, and he was fantastic. And
Nail was there at some point also. We have a good family friend from Indian Lake named Nail. I remember Nail being there for a little bit also.
oh, everybody was there. I mean, so this is the thing is we went and picked up the cash, and New Year's Eve we bought bottles of booze, huge bottles
Oh,
of
I'm
booze,
sure.
and we bought live crab, and we had a crab boil, and I did not do drugs at this point. I just didn't like drugs, and I didn't like people who did drugs. But some of the people in the house did, and there were serious drugs. And I was more drunk than I had ever been in my entire life. And New Year's Eve, we sang and drank, and just it was a long night. And Eben was passed out on the sofa. I had one of the bedrooms, and at 5 o'clock in the morning, the dogs went bananas, and there was banging and yelling and banging and yelling, and nobody could get up and nobody could move because we were I mean, we were passed out, like crawling to the door, and the cops came in looking for mom at 5 a.m. on New Year's morning. And Eben, of course, was like, I want nothing to do with this. What the heck? I do not want.
Let me call my family lawyer.
He's like, I do not want people looking for other people at 5 o'clock in the morning on New Year's Day. This was supposed to be a party. And
Right.
Katie and John, Katie, for all of her faults and wonderful qualities and everything else, Katie hungover is not something you want to deal with.
Oh my gosh, she was so mean when she was hungover.
She was screaming at the cops that my mother wasn't there and that they should get the fuck out and you have no right to be here. And they're screaming at her and saying, we're going to arrest you too. And then John's in the middle of the whole thing. It was a disaster. And they're like, wait a minute. You're 18 and 16. You're not on the rent. What are you doing here? And I'm like, well, I'm allowed to be here. And they're like, she's in Australia. So did she abandon you? No, because I'm over 18. Well, you're not on the lease. If you're over 18, you're saying you're an adult. Back and forth. So they did. They actually searched the crawl space, and they searched everywhere because they knew she was tricky, and they finally believed she was gone. And then Katie and I started our life there because how long were you supposed to be in Australia?
I think we were supposed to be there 2
Okay,
weeks,
well,
2 or 3 weeks.
so that was the thing, was mom was supposed to be back by like the end of January. And
I think we are supposed to be back mid-January because I was in school there. And I know that at this point, I knew at this point I wasn't going to go back to Indian Lake School. I knew that. But in my mind, I really wanted to go back to school there. I loved Indian Lake. That was
right,
like my home,
right. And
you know?
I think the Adirondacks were where we felt at home. And I don't know why we felt at home there and not in Connecticut. And well, I mean, Connecticut's hard if you're not from there. But
Right.
Indian Lake did feel like home. It felt like our people. And
Like everybody was poor, right? I
well,
mean,
everybody
like,
was poor, and everybody's kind of leaves you alone to be quirky. There are a lot of weird people there, and you don't have to
there are.
be. I mean, in Connecticut, in LA, you have to be a certain way. You have to look a certain way. In Indian Lake, you can be like a bear hunter, or you can be a professor. Nobody really cares. You can be
Yeah.
your thing.
But I mean, like I was on the volleyball team, I was on the soccer team, I had good friends there. You know, it was a really good fit for me, and I felt like that was my home. So when we ended up having to go to Australia, I remember asking mom, like, do I have to go? Can I stay here? Can I stay with Taryn's family? And can I stay with anyone else? And, you know, her whole thing, you go where I go, amigo.
Right.
I remember her
Always,
saying that. And I was
always.
like, I never wanted to stab my mom before, but I wanted to stab her in that moment. Like, oh, I'm not your amigo. I don't want to go where you go, you know? So it was very frustrating to me.
Um. Well, yeah, both of us. So you guys go, and I'm mad at you, and I'm mad because you don't want to go, and you're on the plane.
I
And
know. Sorry.
Katie
My
and
bad.
John and I ended up staying behind, and we had a whole different trajectory at this point than you guys did because of that. So, um, why don't you say what happened when you went to Australia? Because this is like a whole thing.
So it was between Christmas and New Year. So it was winter and 3 feet of snow, 4 feet of snow in the Adirondacks, and we went to Australia. We got on a plane, and for whatever reason, we flew to Boston. I'm not sure why or how that happened, but I remember somebody driving us to the airport. I don't know how we got there, but we flew out of Boston. We got to Melbourne, and we were put up in a hotel called the Travelodge. Travelodge was a big thing back then. And it was in the middle of Melbourne. It was fantastic. It was this huge hotel. We had one room with two queen beds, and it was me and Morgan and Mom. And it was the first time that the three of us had ever been like alone without all of us.
And was this all paid for by? This was all paid
This
for
was
by Sell Century.
Yes. So we had a account that we could just charge breakfast, lunch, and dinner to. Like that was all included. And the hotel was paid for by Sale of Century. And I think we were supposed to be there in the hotel for like a week, but she somehow had them do it for 2 weeks. I don't know how that worked out, but so we were there and she was supposed to start filming a couple days after we got there because she was supposed to get, they let you get acclimated because of the time difference and all that. But it was a really long flight. I mean, Australia from New York is, 9-10 hours at that point.
Probably longer than that. Yeah, it's a hike.
Yeah, it was a really long flight, and the flight, the jet lag. It was the first time we'd ever been jet lagged, so it's just like, what is wrong with my body? Killed us. But Morgan and I woke up and we had a great. The first couple of days were really fun. Like we were like, okay, we're here, let's embrace it. Got up, ran around the city, like we hopped. They have a cool train that went through the city. Hopped on the train. We discovered passion fruit soda, which is still my favorite soda in the whole world that they have in Australia. And we got ready for Mom to start filming. We met all the other contestants. There were a couple other American women there, a couple American men. I don't remember their names, but they were nice. Everybody was nice. They did like a cast dinner, and we all went out to dinner together. And it was, we felt very welcome. The people at Sail Essential were fantastic. There were producers everywhere helping us, and all of the people were staying in the same hotel. So it was really kind of fun for a couple of days. And Morgan and I met a couple of girls right off the bat when we got there, named Belinda and Mary. And they were our age, and they were so much fun. And Mom kind of liked that we were running around doing our own thing. And, we went to the movies with them, and Guns N' Roses had released a new album, and we were blasted it everywhere we went on one of their little speakers. Okay, so it was time to get to the actual filming of the show. And, we all kind of felt like there was an end in sight. Like either way, we were going to win or we were going to lose. It was all going to be over soon. And, we could go home. We'd been there for a couple of days at that point. And, we had brought with us.
So did Mom think that she was going to win? I mean, what was the feeling there? Like this was going to be another huge fortune?
I think she knew how urgent this was and like how stressful and how desperate she was for this. So it was kind of a different feeling this time. Like there was a lot more on the line with this one. Like,
we were poor the first time too. Well, but the first time we had been in a house and Dad was in the same city with us, and
right.
Right,
like at this point, Mom and Morgan and I were literally like, we didn't have a home. Like we were homeless, right?
Well, yeah, and so were Katie and I back in. Yeah. Everyone was. Yeah,
and like in our mind, I mean, I think in my mind anyway, you guys were like safe. You were in a house in New York, and in my mind, like, the actuality is obviously always different. But we had brought with us this little box of Trivial Pursuit cards because like when we were little, we had always done that. That was kind of like our thing. Like we would quiz her and do all that. So we wanted to make sure she was ready for the show. And the day of the filming came, and we all went to the studio together. And Mom was nervous. Back to what we were just talking about. During the years earlier when she was filming, it was for fun, and there was nothing to lose. And this time, the prizes and the money were very, very real, and she was really desperate. So there was a different feel to this time. It was a lot more urgent than the previous one had been. So the shows took about 12 hours to tape, and it was a long day, and it was heartbreaking to watch. Mom began to show signs of wear. She wasn't the same woman that won their biggest jackpot earlier she was slipping mentally, and, she had lost. She didn't even make it past the first show. It was awful. Like, she just quickly went out. Like, it
Was
was a
it
round of shows.
so she didn't? How many did she tape? Just one show, and that was it. She was out.
Yeah. She did one show and she was out. I don't even think she answered, 4 or 5 questions right. To my recollection, she didn't answer very many right at all.
And there was no second chance. That was it.
No. It was like, if you win this show, the person who wins that show goes on to the next one. So it was like a bracket kind of thing. And she was out the first show.
So she took it all in good cheer and was happy, and y'all went home, right?
Absolutely. Actually, absolutely opposite of that. We went back to the travel lodge. She was very upset. She was very sad. And she went to bed for a couple of days. She didn't get out of bed. So they had a goodbye dinner for everybody that had come and were on the show. And it was kind of fun. There were all of these awards and everybody was dressed up nice. And mom had gotten out of bed and showered and went to the awards show. So it was a nice dinner in a beautiful place. And then the next night, there was like another little dinner just for people. It was more casual. And it was kind of just a couple of the contestants. And there were a couple of women there that we had met that my mom had gotten to be friends with. And she had told this woman that her card didn't work. She had not done the international thing. So she had not put an international, she had taken off the international hold or something. And that's what she had told the woman, that it wasn't working internationally. So she asked if she could borrow her card, and she would, of course, send her a check as soon as we got back to America. And you guessed it, that did not happen.
Okay. But and I know, mom never had a credit card in her life.
Correct. I did know that.
Okay.
And it was it was the first time, because I really liked this woman. She was very sweet. I don't remember her name, but she had like a bob, and it was like curly blonde hair. And she was just such a sweet woman. I really adored her. And I remember thinking, I don't like where this is headed. And it was the first time I was uncomfortable, because I really liked somebody mom was about to scam, and like that I knew of, and I knew that, I was going to be part of it. So she borrowed a credit card from a woman and said that when she got back, she would send her a check for whatever we had spent. And we just needed it to get us home. We were leaving the next day, right? We were going to come back to America the next day on this flight. Well, the next day came, and mom said, you know what? I think we're going to stay another day or two, and we're just going to hang out here. We're in Australia. We might as well just kind of poke around a little bit. So we stayed at the same hotel for a couple of days. And 2 or 3 days later, and again, we're running around the city. We would go to the public pools all the time. We would go to the beach. I mean, it's summertime in Australia, right? Like, so it's the middle of the summer there. It's hot. We went to the beach. The beaches were gorgeous. I saw my first pair of boobies on the beach, because it was topless beach. And I was like, holy cow, where am I? And I was like, oh, they put French fries on their burgers there. It was Vegemite everywhere.
Oh, I want a French fries on a burger. That sounds excellent.
They put French fries, and they put a fried egg on their burger. So good. So good. But they had like Vegemite at McDonald's. And I'm like, what is this crap? But anyway, so after a couple of days, Travelodge put 2 and 2 together that Sale of the Century was no longer paying the bill for our room. And they very politely asked us to leave by boxing up all of our goods and putting them outside of our room. Actually, they put them at the front desk. And when they saw us coming back from something, they said, I'm sorry, we've had to, repossess your room. You no longer have a room here. So with this woman's credit card, we went and got another cheap hotel for a night. And then the next day, mom said, hey, you know what? While we're over here, I think it'd be so fun to just drive down to Sydney for a couple of days and check out Sydney. Because Melbourne to Sydney is like a 14, 15-hour drive, but you drive down.
I was just going to say, that's not close.
No, not at all.
That's like driving LA to San Francisco or LA to like Seattle.
It's, LA to Seattle. Kind of like 14, 15 hours. It was a hike.
Yeah. It's not something that you just like do.
Oh, no, you just do it. It's fine. Not a big deal. Okay. Yeah, so you just hop in the car. So
you also don't have a car.
Well, so we went and rented a car on this woman's credit card.
Okay.
And mom was the only one who could drive. I mean, Morgan was 15. Morgan didn't drive. Mom drove, right?
Okay.
And Morgan could drive a little bit. Like, she kind of knew how to drive, but
Morgan was 15. That's the whole point. It doesn't matter if she knew how.
Well, okay. Well, this comes into play later. So I'm just, that's called foreshadowing. So we rented a car and we left Melbourne, and we drove from Melbourne to Sydney. And
Okay.
I think it was a 3-day trip or 2-day trip. And it was absolutely gorgeous. It was the
Oh, I
most
bet.
beautiful thing. Like you drive through and you're driving through like the Snowy River National Forest. And like, I'm like, hey, I think someone's parrot's loose. And it's like, no, that's just a parrot. Like, this is where they're from,
Yeah.
and it was unbelievable. And we went through this beach and it was called, I can't remember, 13 Mile Beach or something. It was so pretty that I like swore I would someday bring my kids back there. It was the most incredible beach in the world. Spoiler alert, I did get to bring my kids back there and it was just as cool as I expected. So,
That's really neat.
yeah, that was kind of fun. So, we did that drive. We got to Sydney and oh my God, what did we do in Sydney? Oh, so we get into Sydney and the whole way we're driving through all this stuff. Of course, I think it's beautiful. And they're pointing out this beautiful thing. And every time they would say something, isn't this beautiful? I'd say, yuck, no, I want to go home. That was like my quote, ugh, it's ugly. I want to go home. And that was my whole thing. It was a beautiful place. I really wanted to go home. At this point, it was like
Well,
2.5, 3 weeks.
you were what? You were 13 or 14?
13, almost 14.
You
Yeah.
were younger than Scout.
Yeah.
Scout says, yuck, I want to go home. I was in Italy with her on her 13th birthday, and I wanted to go scuba diving on erect, to go see beautiful antiques under the ocean. And she sat around complaining because she hated the entire place and wanted to go home and didn't like the food and everything was terrible. And
Solidarity,
Italy,
Scout. Solidarity.
I'm on the beach in Italy on my birthday, on her birthday. Like, can we just enjoy the Italian beach? Nope, I hate everything. I want to go home. The food sucks. This is terrible. Okay,
Yeah.
so
It was,
yes,
I was miserable. I did not like it. I wanted to go home. It was, I knew that school had already started again and I was missing things. And yeah, I had FOMO before it was FOMO. I didn't.
yeah.
So we get to Sydney and we're there for a day. We're walking around Sydney. We went to the aquarium, which was absolutely unbelievable. That was the first time I was like, okay, this is actually really cool. We saw the opera house. We did the whole thing. Um, and we're sitting there in the hotel room and mom said, and I was really just in a shitty mood. And mom said, I think I have a plan that we can stay here for a lot longer if we want to. And she'd been working some plan, like every hotel we had stopped in along this route. She'd been on the phone with people. We used to wake up in the middle of like 7 a.m. and she'd be on the phone with someone whispering. Do you remember
She
that?
was always doing that. She was always on the phone with somebody talking about a plan or writing in her notebook
Yeah.
notes about something that you didn't know where it came from.
And it was like this weird shorthand she had that she wrote notes in.
Yes, she did write shorthand, so you had no idea
I had
whether
no idea what it
you
was.
would read it.
So she said, I have this plan and we can stay here for a while longer and I'd really like to. And I threw a fucking fit that you would not believe. I
I believe it.
I threw things, I kicked the wall, I screamed. I absolutely said, this is not happening. I'm going home with or without you. I will call Meagan. I will call Katie. They will come get me. Like, I'm like 13 years old. Like, Meagan's going to come get me from Australia. Like, I mean,
I would have.
you couldn't leave the country. I didn't know that at all.
That's true. I would have eventually come to get you.
Barely, I didn't know that. So I threw a fit. And, Morgan was kind of like, hey, we're in Australia. We should stay. This is cool. And, I think Morgan's whole thing, and I know we've talked about this before, is she was bigger than Indian Lake. Like she wanted to do big things. She wanted to be a California girl. She wanted to do something big with her life. And I just wanted, a quiet life. Like I wanted stability. I wanted to be in school versus running around Australia. What a nerd was I, right? What a nerd.
Well, I mean, I was kind of like Morgan in a lot of ways. I was too big for Indian Lake. I wanted to go to Australia. I wanted to go do the big things. But at 13, a lot of kids just want to be home and doing their own thing. It doesn't even matter whether you loved Australia or wanted to travel. You were 13. You had a right to want to be, doing your own thing.
Oh, well, one thing we did do before we ended up leaving, in this whole little time period that I thought was so cool was just south of Melbourne. I guess we did this on the way from Melbourne to Sydney. There's a little island called Phillip Island, and that's where the fairy penguins are.
I was just gonna say, yeah, that's what penguins are.
Yeah, so we went and we saw the fairy penguins.
How did you get out there? Like you just paid the money and took a ferry or something, or did a
No,
flight?
it's like you take a bridge from Melbourne to
Oh, okay.
Island. Yeah, you just drive
Okay.
over a bridge. But like you're driving over the bridge and there are like sheep on the hills and it's like rolling countryside. And it's like the most beautiful country in the world. And I only remember this so well because again, I was lucky enough to take my kids back a few years, like 15 years ago or 12 years ago. And we went back and we did the fairy penguins too with my friend Kelly. My friend Kelly that I met in Singapore had a house on Phillip Island, coincidentally. It was like,
Okay, that's pretty neat.
it was so cool. So she invited us. Sorry, I'm getting way sidetracked, but she invited us for Christmas one year when we lived in Singapore. So we did the whole Melbourne to Sydney drive again, but with money this time, which was so nice. But anyway, so we were in Sydney with me and Morgan and mom, and we convinced her finally to go home. And but we had this rental car that we had to, that was rented in Melbourne for like city use in Melbourne only, and we were in Sydney. So Morgan drove, and she took the car, and we drove it from the hotel like 6 blocks away, and we parked it outside of like, it was, let's say it was Hertz or whatever. We parked it around the corner from the Hertz rental car company, and this is like after hours. So we parked the car around the corner, and we wrote them a note inside, and we wrote them a note and said, "Hi, you can find your car around the corner at this location. Here are the car keys." And we slipped it through the after hours box so that they could have their car back.
That's because you were leaving, or
We were
because you were
leaving.
okay.
We were leaving to go back to America.
Okay.
So I convinced them to head back home, and we ended up, we drove back, we flew back, and we flew back to Albany.
Okay, so for some reason, I thought I remembered a lot more criminal activity and grift and bad stuff. It was all on one person's credit card?
It might have been 2 credit cards, but my understanding is it was one lady's credit card.
And she didn't steal from anybody at this point. She didn't grab anybody's wallet or do anything else. It was all just one credit card on one poor woman that
Yes.
you knew, but it wasn't okay.
Yeah.
Because later on, Nora and I were just talking before this episode about how bad it got. And mom did a lot worse than just one person's credit card. Like she was stealing jewelry and stuff.
Yeah,
so,
this was the first time that I can ever remember her like using someone else besides yours, sorry, using someone else's identity and having like a credit card and using it for whatever the hell she wanted. This is the first time I think she did that.
To some degree, I think this is going to sound really weird and making it all about me, but I really think that once I left, she didn't care because I kind of kept her from doing bad stuff. I wouldn't have let her do it. I would have told Aunt Nora. I would have told the father. I would have done something about it. And not that you and Morgan wouldn't have.
No, we didn't.
But
I mean, but at that point, like, you're kind of with your mom and she's doing this thing and it's not right, but you're like, it'll all work out.
Right. But I think after this point, this is the point where everything went sideways. There was nothing.
Everything went to shit and nothing was left when this was done.
Yeah, this was it. This was the absolute, your life was, I mean, and you're talking about turning points where what if I had gone to Australia with you? And what if, I might have, if mom had said, let's stay here, I might have said, hell yeah, I'm going to go to college here. Let's do this.
Well, and I think anybody listening, and is thinking there's no way that all of this stuff happened without somebody trying to intervene, or someone in the family trying to jump in and say, we have to help these kids. There's too many weird things happening. We did have family members who wanted us. They wanted us to come live with them. They wanted us to stay with them. They wanted to help us.
Not all 4 of us. Nobody wants 4 kids.
Okay, well,
I will say that.
Me.
So, I will say this. One of the everybody in the family wanted to help.
Right.
Nobody wanted 4 feral girls.
Right.
And I don't think there's anybody who would have taken on all 4 of us. Nobody has the resources for that. Especially, all of our family that could have taken us in had kids of their own and a husband.
Yep.
And they had 2 kids of their own. And one of my aunts didn't have kids at the time.
Yeah,
but
she had at this point, she had 2 babies.
Yeah, she had 2 babies.
Yep.
And the other ones had older kids, or they were our age. Nobody can take in 4 feral children. And the big, big thing with taking in the 4 of us is that you're dealing with my mother.
Yeah, you knew she was always going to be there in the background.
My mother is a force of nature. So in order to get the 4 of us, you would have to sue, go through custody, fight her tooth and nail, have her trying to abduct us in the middle of the night, and have all of us convinced that we wanted to be with her, and we would sneak out in the middle of the night and go away, and we would be screaming and yelling and saying there was no way you were going to take us. There was no real way for any of them to intervene.
And at this point,
And
you were 18, you were 19.
right. But up until this point, like, why didn't anybody step in
Right.
up until this point? Um, they helped by giving her money to keep us from being homeless. And there was never a grand plan to buy her a house or pay her rent for a year or figure out a long term plan, because my mother always said she had it covered. That first she won sale of the century, everything was covered. Or she was going to get the money from the house in Los Angeles and everything was covered. Or she was getting the money from this Adirondack deal and everything was covered. It was going to be fine. And so there was nobody ever stepped in to make a plan until it was too late. Until I was 18,
Yep.
Katie's 17, you guys are young, and it was just a disaster. All right, so you come back from Australia.
We came back from Australia and we call you, and you and Katie at this point are living in a little apartment in Hudson Falls, New York.
Okay, so here's the thing. You guys were gone. It seems like you guys were gone a lot longer than that.
I don't like, I honestly, and I know this is going to sound so weird to people, I have no idea how long we were gone for. I don't know. It could have been a month, it could have been 3 months. I don't know the answer to that.
I think you were gone until at least March. Because this is what I know and what I did on my end was we had moved into that house right before Christmas, and we took the money and we went and paid off all of the credit cards and all of the bills and or whatever checks, all the bills, everything else. Kept her out of jail. I went to court. I paid off my bounced checks and kept myself out of jail. The judge gave me a stern lecture, and I didn't know whether to thank him or roll my eyes at him or spit. And I decided that because I had been out of college the semester before that, I couldn't do that anymore. And I enrolled at the community college, the Adirondack Community College, because I didn't know what my plan was, but I knew I wanted to do that. In the meantime, I don't remember how or why, but we didn't have the money for rent for February and March because we had spent all of that money on
Cocaine.
partying and paying off bad checks. And I think we also bought a car, like a $4,000 car. We had to go down to New York City to buy because Mom told us to. But I do know Mom expected there to be, $10,000 left over from that 15,000, and it wasn't there. And I mean, there's only so much money you can spend on alcohol and booze in a month. It wasn't.
I
like
remember her being very upset with you guys because she did expect you guys to have money when we got back.
Right, but we literally did what she said. We paid off all the checks and paid off all the debt and bought stuff for the house and just stupid stuff like the battery on the car was always dead and we had to get the car jumped all the time, and $100 here and $100 there and some groceries, and it just went. And the guy and I think it was only like a month to month lease for the winter. It wasn't like a long-term thing. It was like you can have the house for January and by February you need to be out. All I know is that we were out of money. Katie and I didn't know what to do, and the guy from the Red Wings called us and said, "We want my house back. I'm only gone for a month or two. I need to come back." And and so by March 1st, I did something I had never done before, and I called a family member for help. And I called my Uncle Bernie, and I said, "I want to get my own place." And he's like, "About fucking time. Sure, what do you need?" And
I love him.
I found an apartment for $300 a month rent, and I needed a $300 deposit and $300 for the first month. And that seemed like the most money I had ever imagined owing somebody. And it was an insane amount of money to borrow from somebody, but I didn't care. And he said, "Here's $600, off you go." And it's funny, you don't think about it. I don't even remember in those days how you would have done that. Would he have mailed me a check? Would I have gone to Western Union? Things were just harder then.
I do remember going to Western Union occasionally, so I feel like that was a thing back then.
Yeah, but Uncle Bernie wouldn't have gone to Western Union.
He probably would have just gone to his bank and wired it.
Yeah, that's true.
I don't know.
So Katie and I got a tiny little apartment, and it was 3 bedrooms, but it was a little, I mean, the whole thing was probably 500 square feet. And it was on the upper floor of a house where an 85-year-old man and his wife lived downstairs.
I remember.
And they rented out the downstairs, and their names were Mr. and Mrs. Flood. And so this is 1990. I think they were born in 1905 and 1908, something like that. And they had lived in that house ever since he was born in 1905. And so they had lived in that house for, 85 years. And she loved us. And the biggest tragedy, though, and this was really hard, I don't even like talking about it, but it was hard, is that they wouldn't take dogs. And we still had Toby and Sugar. And Katie said, I can't go without my dog. And we said, okay. And we took Sugar to meet them. And they said, oh, Sugar, Sugar, Sugar. Oh, Sugar, she's such a sweet little thing. But they couldn't have Toby. They couldn't have a Weiler Doberman in their house.
Yeah.
And Katie and I had to take Toby to the pound. And we begged them to find him a good home. But we were literally stuck with nothing but the clothes on our back, no place to live. And Uncle Bernie had given me the money for an apartment. And I was not going to let that go because of a dog. But we had carried this dog, for all over the country at this point, and I was devastated for it. But it wasn't even my dog. I didn't even like the dog. It was like, and this was one of the points where I was like, I've got to make sacrifices. I've sat in a jail for this woman. I cannot lose my life over a dog. I've got to.
And I will say, Toby at this point was older and had a lot of like hip problems, and Toby was not going to be along much longer. So, like,
Well, no, I was hoping you were going to say Toby was a great dog, and I'm sure somebody adopted him and loved him because he was so sweet. So I don't know. Either
well,
way,
Toby was my dog, so I'm looking at the bright side. Like, he was
yes,
it within a year or two, it would have been a very different situation for him. He would have been very expensive. He would have been in
yes,
a lot of pain. Like, I
yes,
don't ever feel bad that, like, of course, like when I found out, I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about? Toby's gone." Like
right,
it was
right,
heartbreaking. But
right.
with some retrospect, and
Yeah, like
it's
there was just no way. There was, and it was one of the hardest things I've had to do was like, but also somebody else put me in this
I
situation.
know.
I didn't ask to
I
be in
was
this
mad
situation.
at mom. I was not mad at you
Oh yeah.
guys. Like I was.
Well, and then you guys got back. So Katie and I moved into this place, and we had no furniture. And I don't remember what you did for Craigslist garage sales there. You probably looked
I
for
sat
ads
on
in
a
the paper, but
couch. I remember sitting on a couch, and I remember you guys saying it was so funny. This is actually one of my favorite like fun memories, and you probably don't remember this, but you guys at like I want to say 5:30 at night, you said, come here," and we would go down and sit at the bottom of the stairs. And the old people downstairs would listen to Jeopardy really loud, and we could hear it through the stairs or through the wall because the wall was so
yep,
thin. Do you remember
yep.
that? And we would
I
sit
don't
on
remember
this.
that.
We would
No,
sit on the stairwell and listen to their Jeopardy when you guys didn't, when your TV wasn't working.
these people were so fantastic. I don't. Yeah, we never had a TV. I had nothing,
Yeah.
and I got a job at Pizza Hut, and I waited tables at Pizza Hut, and I ended up living in this place for 3 years and going to school here for 3 years, and I loved these people. And the little old lady was very, very old school, 1930s, 1940s. She had not ever come out of this. She wore a wig every morning and perched it on top of her head. And she insisted that since I was going to school, she would make me a lunch, a packed lunch to go. That's a very upstate New York thing that you take a packed lunch everywhere, and that it's always chicken sandwiches, and it's just dry chicken between two pieces of bread. But she put butter on the bread, and every morning she would get up and she would make me a chicken sandwich because she thought that was maybe part of my rent or something, or it was the right thing to do, or just the nice thing to do. I don't know,
That's such a great
but
story.
it is. I really loved her, and she was kind enough to let me take the dog in, and they loved Sugar and they loved Katie, and from that point on, I waited tables at Pizza Hut and I went to college, and I was very lost and kind of alone, but also happy because it was my own place and my own life. But when you guys got back, the first thing mom did was say, okay, we're going to move in with you. You've got 3 bedrooms. And I was horrified. And I had started going to a counselor at the community college. It was the best thing that ever happened to me.
Wow.
And she said, you can't let your mother move in with you. And I said, what do you mean? My mother has to move in with me. I can't leave her homeless. And she said, no, you have to say no. And my mom was furious. I had stolen all of her money and taken all of her money and used it irresponsibly and thrown it all away. And probably I did use a lot of it irresponsibly. I really don't remember what happened to it, but I know I didn't blow the whole thing. I
Right.
know I did what she told me to do. and there's probably a couple $1,000s that was, missing. But um, in general, I knew I hadn't done that, but she was furious, screaming at anybody who would listen that I screwed her over, and not Katie, of course, just me. And she ended up doing something that I had never seen her do before, and this was like how we knew it was the beginning of the end. She decided that, I don't know why there were still cops looking for her, but there were. I think the bad
Nope,
checks
that's
weren't
after
enough.
this apartment.
She was wanted for something else.
We moved into an apartment in Glens Falls. We moved into an apartment.
Okay, so she did
We
move
got
into an apartment first. Okay, so you guys got an apartment. Yes. So you guys got an apartment, and she was mad that she had to get an apartment.
It
Furious
was a
that she had
little
to get an
tiny
apartment. I
apartment.
don't
It
know
was
where
a
she got the
three-bedroom
money for it.
apartment, and it was above
But
the dentist's
mad that
office, and it was in Glens Falls.
and she did that to be near Katie and me, and furious that we were both paying separate rent, and that I was making her maintain her own place when I had an apartment where she could live for free. And if I was making money at Pizza Hut and I could make my own rent, why would I make her get her own place? And didn't
And
I
I,
love her? And didn't I
yeah,
love you guys? And what was wrong with me?
this apartment
So
that
that
I
was
started going to
really
school in this
hard.
apartment. I went to Glens Falls High School, or middle school. I went to Glens Falls Middle School because I was in 8th grade in this apartment. And it was so fun. I had the best time of my life in Glens Falls. I met great friends that I'm friends with on Facebook
I
to this
was
day. I'm
really,
still friends
I
with
was
these
happy
people.
there.
I started drinking.
Yeah. I mean, I was happy there. I thought it was a good place to live. It was better than the Adirondacks because it wasn't
I mean, it's
as
only an hour
cold in the
away
winter. It
from
was still
Indian
just as
Lake,
cold, but not
right? It's
as
not that
remote.
far. It,
Right. Right. So it had all the beauty of the place there, but you weren't stuck in a little
I will
town
say
in the middle
this
of
is the
nowhere where the
apartment
roads
that I
closed when
started
there's a
drinking.
blizzard.
I had my first cigarette. I smoked pot for the first time, and I kissed my first boy
Oh,
for the first time. Shane Mulcahy, hey.
wow.
Oh, I went
That's some
crazy
good
in that
church stuff
house. We
there.
used to go to parties and fields.
But
Oh, it was the worst. Yeah, we
okay,
were there
so
for like
so
three or four
so I don't
months.
think that
Two or
lasted
three.
very long though, because so where this all wraps up is
Yeah.
that by the end of that semester of college for me, and by the end of everything else,
This was the
mom
summertime.
was
It
wanted
was
again.
summertime.
There were more warrants out for her. Summertime, yeah. And
Four
mom
Winds,
decided to
Saratoga
check herself
Springs.
into a mental hospital. 4 Winds. And I remember thinking that maybe this was going to be good for her. Maybe this was actually going to help. And that maybe she was mentally ill and that maybe this would fix everything. Um, and then it became clear that she was doing that to avoid being arrested, that they weren't going to go arrest her from a mental hospital. And you, she made Morgan come stay with us. And I was mad about being saddled with a 15-year-old sister. I remember that. And I know that that's not fair to Morgan. Morgan had no place to go. But I also remember thinking, I can barely feed myself. I don't want to give my extra bedroom to Morgan. I don't have room for this. I can't do this. And I'm being sucked back into this.
I
And I don't remember you
I
dying.
ended up going to stay
You
with
got moved.
our aunt and uncle in Houston. And that was the first time that I had ever spent any
Okay.
time with them. I was
And
not
they
told
must have
that
known that mom was in a
until
mental hospital.
halfway through my stay there. I feel
So
like
where did
I remember
you think she
thinking
was, or what did you
mom
think
had
was
gone
going
to
on?
visit Uncle Bernie and Aunt Sonia. I think that's what I was told. That she went to visit her siblings. So we
Huh.
moved out of that apartment. I went to go stay with them in Houston for the summer. Had a great summer. Um, yeah.
I bet.
Well,
They
you
were
know
always
me. I'm
fantastic.
a
I mean,
joiner. We
Houston was
joined
always
a
the
summer camp.
place.
I joined a day camp at the YMCA in Houston, and we went all over Houston every day. We went swimming. We would go roller skating. We'd go ice skating. We went to movies. We had the best time ever. We had so much fun that summer. And Uncle Bob would drop me off in the morning. I would
God,
go
that
play with
sounds
my
like
friends all day, go back. We'd have a nice dinner. It was like the most fun summer. Sydney was a little tiny baby. I was babysitting her. She was like 10 months old, maybe a year old. Ben was like 3 or 4.
sounds like the worst
Oh my God, it was
life
so fun. I
ever.
had the best
Going to
time.
a summer
And I
camp
would
with
like
people I
sneak
didn't know every day.
cigarettes and it was
God,
the
tell me.
best. I remember smoking in Uncle Bob's bathroom and he was like,
Um,
hey, don't ever smoke a cigarette in my house again. and Aunt Nora found my cigarettes, and she cut them in half and like dumped water in them in the trash can because I went to go get them out of the trash can. I thought she'd just throw them away. She had like crushed them and poured water all over them. Oh, I was so mad. Oh,
God,
awful.
how dare
Yeah.
somebody parent you? Um, so then, anyway, to wrap up this whole
This was,
saga,
I will
this was
say
kind of
to
the
anyone
beginning
still
of the
listening
end.
to
We knew that
this and the
this
next
was
2 or 3 years is a lot of this. It's a lot of what the fuck are you talking about? How did you end up doing this? Where did you go? Do you remember what happened from here to here? It's a lot of, I mean, in the next couple of years from this point on, I probably moved another 8 to 10 times.
and mom got progressively
Right.
worse and bold from, okay, I've got a scheme that's a little sketchy, but it might make a lot of money, to fuck it, steal
It
her purse,
was,
take her jewelry, let's
yeah.
just throw the stuff
It
in the
went from
thing and
borrowing
I don't
someone's
care who
credit card
catches
to
me.
stealing people's wallets out of
And
their purses very quickly after this. So it was,
right,
yeah, it was a lot. But
right.
I think that her going to the mental hospital that summer was the best thing that could have happened to me because it showed me what I wanted my life to look like. I knew that you could have a family and you could have dinner at 5 o'clock and you could have kids and do the whole thing. And
Right. And that was what I mean. Going to
right,
see them, my aunt and uncle in Houston did the same for me. They gave baths every night, and they made sure their kids brushed their teeth. And the kids got dressed every morning in clean clothes, and they had pajamas, and the pajamas were in a certain place. And there was no throwing everything on the pile next to the floor. There was next to the bed. It was just there was laundry done, and it was done well. And there was the refrigerator was cleaned out, and they ate dinner at home, and they didn't say
my God. And
grab
I remember
food on
one
the
night
way to somewhere and
they were
just do
going to a
fast food.
bookstore and
They
I
didn't
was
do fast
babysitting
food.
my cousin and she asked me if I wanted a book and I said, "Oh, I'm really into Stephen King right now because I just discovered like reading for fun." I said, "Can you get me the new Stephen King book?" And she came back with Jane Austen and I was like, "I don't want Jane Austen. I want Stephen King. I want murder. I want mayhem. I want trash." And she's like, "No, Jane Austen's really good for your brain." And I'm like, "Bro, I don't want something good for my brain. I want, you know." So,
Well, I remember one of my absolute favorite memories is when we would go there. First of all, they put the kids to bed
reading
every night
books.
at a certain time, and they would lie down with them. And they would always say, and Bob would always say, because he was, pretty young and hip at this point, he'd say, "Well, after I put the kids to bed, we'll go out." And I was like, because he wanted to go do cool stuff. And he was probably 38 at this point, maybe. And so I would
Mhm.
he'd put the kids to bed. He'd always fall asleep while putting them to bed, and he'd get back up, and I'd be like, "Going out?" He's like, "Oh my god,
The
oh,
book
I
stop.
guess." But we would go to the bookstore, the book stop, and he would buy me whatever I wanted. I could buy $100 worth of books if I wanted to. I could buy as many books as I wanted, and it was never
And it
an
was fun,
issue, and
right?
it
I mean,
was
they
the
were starting this
best thing
company that I
ever.
now work for, and it was that I've now worked for 28 years. So I remember, the company had just been open for like 5 years at that point, and it was a really big deal. So
It was a really big deal, and it was just nice to see normal families. And I always used to think, how did my aunt grow
all of
up
our
and
aunts,
do all
they
these
all grew
normal
up and
things, and
had
my
these
mom can't
wonderful
do any of the
lives,
normal
and
things?
mom was just chaos after chaos. Okay,
All right, so after this, it just spirals
I think so too.
further and
And
further. So I think this
again,
is a good point to end it.
it's it's very chaotic the next couple of years, and a lot of people listening to this are going to think there's no way this is true. And I'm just here to tell you, it absolutely all happened. It absolutely changed a lot of people's lives. And, it shaped who we are and who we became.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the whole point of this: is how do you go through this and then learn how to do normal? How do you do baths for your kids?
Well, I will tell you, every time my kids have a cavity, they blame it on my bad parenting. So maybe I didn't know. Maybe I never learned.
It's really funny.
Ah,
All
all
right.
right. Well,
So after all that, thank you for listening to Forever Wild.
if you are flabbergasted by this episode like I am, or if you enjoyed this episode, let us know.
We would love to hear from you. So send us your questions, thoughts, ideas for what to talk about next, and what you'd like to hear more about.
Until next time, stay wild. Bye.
Bye.